Jose Luis Marti. Jose, you're there?
Here I am. Yes.
Okay, great.
Let me try to share. Can you see my presentation now?
We only see us yes, there it is. There it is.
Okay, good. Okay, so good morning, almost good afternoon here in Barcelona. And so first of all, thank you very much to John and to the DCD and EDDA and the University of Iceland for organizing this. It's actually a pleasure to see many of you good friends, and the only sad part of this is that I'm not able to be there with you, or we are not able to be physically present. Today I would like to talk, that should not be a surprise to anyone who knows me. I would like to talk about collective intelligence, as I always do. But today I would like to make the argument in favor of collective intelligence, even in times of crisis. I think that, or maybe even spatially in times of crisis, I think we should rely on collective intelligence and crowdsourcing mechanisms. So I'm convinced that this is of much help even in times of emergency or crisis, as we are living today. And most of what I will say actually connects with what Prime Minister Jakobsdóttir was saying before in the presentation. I want to say in advance that I will be very critical with the way in which many governments and many organizations have been dealing with the crisis. And I think, there's a few exceptions in the world, and I think it's fair to mention that Iceland has been one of them, in my view. As far as I know, I think Iceland, as well as New Zealand or Estonia or even South Korea, I think that they have managed the crisis in different ways, but all of them quite effective and legitimate. And I think that, unfortunately, that's not the same that you can say about many other governments. So basically what I would like to do is start with a few comments on the context that we are living, that we all know very well. So I will be quick here. And then I would like to review what I call 5 government temptations. I think that, and let me put it in biblical terms, I don't know why, but I think that in times of crisis, or when governments face tremendous plagues like the one that we are facing today, I think that they might be captured by 5 kind of temptations that I would like to mention and analyze briefly and try to reject or leave aside. And then I think that, actually helping governments to try to avoid these temptations, and especially some of them, I think that collective intelligence can provide very good examples. And I would like to put a couple of them at the end of my talk. So first, in terms of the context, I think, our governments and our political institutions in general, not only the executives, but I think that many political institutions, including, for instance, courts, which are under much pressure in many countries, and many of them are paralyzed or they stopped their activity due to the confinement and so on. So our institutions have not been designed, they were never designed to deal with global emergencies and disruptive crises like this. It's true that in all our constitutions, or in most constitutions, we have some provisions of states of alarm, states of emergency, and so on. Normally, what happens in most countries is that they are very much underdeveloped or undeveloped. And so we don't have clear and concrete guidance about what to do and how to react to situations of emergency, which I think creates a lack of regulation and a lack of rule of law in times like this, which is not good to begin with. And which was, by the way, this has been pointing out by constitutional lawyers for a long time. It's not a new thing that we discovered right now. But I think the crisis, the COVID pandemic, has shown very clearly that was unfortunately the case. I think we in times like this, we must adapt quickly. We need to make lots of important and consequential decisions. So many of the decisions that our governments are taking today They will have tremendous consequences, of course, in the short time, but also in the long run, they will have some consequences also for the long run. And we have to do that lacking knowledge, right? We lack a lot of knowledge, of course, about the virus and about how the virus spreads and how it will evolve in the future. We know very little about this. And we have a tremendous scarcity of resources, a scarcity of time. We need to make decisions very quickly, as I said. And sometimes we would need some kind of people involved in making these decisions and helping us to make these decisions. And it's not always the case that they get involved, at least in the best way. So it's a difficult situation, of course, which we need to face. By the end of January, I was going to a conference in Leicester, and it was a conference on crowd justice, which more or less connects with things that I want to discuss with you later. And in that conference, I prepared a PowerPoint, and actually I used some slides for the PowerPoint today, as we scholars used to do all the time, right, for economy of resources. But I thought it was interesting to mention that one of the slides that I used there to introduce also context, because I think that not only now, because we have the COVID crisis, but every time, always, we need to have pay some attention to the larger picture and the bigger picture, and have a clearer understanding of the context in which we are moving. And so when I went to Leicester, that was late January. So it was just 3 months ago. It sounds like prehistory now, but it was 3 months ago. And I one of my first slides presented what I identified as 4 factors of change, deep change, societal, political, economic change today. And of course, now I would add a 5th one, but the thing, the most interesting thing, I guess, is that the first 4, they are still there. They always were there, or they've been there for years. And I think that they continue to mark and characterize the kind of world that we are living today, even despite of this tremendous change that the crisis implies. So the first factor of change was what I identified: growing complexity. Our world is more and more complex, and this affects political decision-making particularly. I think that we need to make decisions every day about very complex issues for many reasons. One of them connects actually with the second factor of change, which is globalization and the rise of global challenges. So we are facing challenges like climate change and nuclear security and peace in the world and global inequalities and so on. Many of them are not necessarily new, right? So we've been facing them for a long time, but they are increasingly more complex and more global. The globalization has increased, the global dimension of them has increased. And the third one is digital revolution, and we all know about this and how this is disrupting our life in many senses and dimensions. The fourth one is also familiar to all of us: the crisis of democracy and the rise of populist movements and the decline, the tremendous decline in the last decades of citizens' trust on governments and institutions in general, but despite what happens in Iceland and what Prime Minister Jakobsdóttir said. But in general, in many countries, in most countries, the citizenry doesn't trust their governments anymore. And what is more worrisome, I think, is that this is so even more among the young people, the youth. And then we have this 5th factor of change, which is the COVID, which I think that, I'm not exaggerating. I think if we say that this is going to change everything or many aspects of our lives and in our societies from many different points of view, from the health point of view, of course, but also from the economic point of view. We are going to face a tremendous economic crisis. We all know that. But it's going to change also our social and our societies and our culture, many of our cultures. And it's going to change for good or for bad. It's going to change as well our political environment and the way we think about political institutions. I think the COVID crisis, I think, fits very well with what I call a double global challenge. So this means there are global challenges that they affect us all in some sense, because they affect the kind of global common good or the kind of global collective interest, just to use Alvina's terminology, right? So that it's in the public interest or the global interest of everyone to face them. And one of them might be nuclear security. So if a Fukushima nuclear plant has a problem, this is in the interest of everyone that we can react and keep the zone safe as much as we can, and so on. Because some problems, even if they only have local effects, it's in the public interest that we can provide some kind of global response or reaction. But there are other global problems, and these are the ones that I identify as double global problems or challenges, that they are global in a second sense. They are global also in the literal sense that they affect us all, right? And I think that the COVID example is a paradigmatic example of this. So you can look now to China or South Korea, which are countries, or Iceland, which are countries where, fortunately, you have controlled the pandemic so far. And the thing is, you cannot open borders and you cannot feel safe until every single other country in the world can go through the crisis and can keep it under control. So if there is one single country where the pandemic is out of control, this is a potential threat to everyone. And that means that it's in the literal global interest of everyone that we kind of provide a kind of effective reaction to this. So I think this, maybe finally, this slide was exactly one of the slides that I presented in Leicester before the COVID crisis. There I said, we face a totally new reality. You know, we are living already in a total new era of humankind, and we need radically new institutions and tools to face these new challenges in an effective way. Basically to preserve the goals that we've been pursuing all our life and for all the history of humanity, right? The values of justice and democracy. I think, you know, I was having this grandiloquent and, you know, very big words, and I was saying this just a few weeks before going through the crisis of virus and getting it myself. And now I think, I mean, it's in a way, it's funny how big these words were and how ignorant I was about the weeks that were coming. So I go to the second part, which is the central part of my talk, and I want to mention these 5 government temptations. So I think, you know, the truth is that I think that we should be modest here. The truth is that we are all pretty much lost in the current crisis. It's quite unprecedented. Of course, it's not the first pandemic that we face, you know, and we are now familiar with all the other pandemics. We are almost all of us are almost epidemiologists at this point after reading so many papers on this. But the thing is, you know, we never faced a pandemic like this in a global, in a world like the one that we are living, which, you know, changes it all. And I think that, you know, most governments, I think it's fair to say they are lost because that's the first time that they are facing something like this. So we ignore lots of things, not only about the virus, of course, but also about the economic effects of the confinement that we are having, about the political effects of the restrictions of liberties, and so on and so forth. So we ignore many things. We are semi-blind facing this problem. And what I see is that governments from all over the world, as I said, they are not designed and ready, well prepared for dealing with this. Although important differences of degree exist, of course, and as I mentioned at the beginning, there are important exceptions in the way in which they have been dealing with this. So I think that because of this, because we are lost, we don't know many things, our governments were not precisely designed to face these things. The conjunction of all these issues, I think that might put governments under the pressure or under the temptation of committing the following 5 mistakes. The first of all, I think, I mean, we are all familiar with that, and it has happened in different degrees maybe, but it has happened everywhere, I think. The first temptation is that governments, when they face the situation of emergency, they tend to centralize decision-making power at the national executive level. And maybe there's a good reason to do that. I'm not saying so many of these temptations, there's a rationale behind them, and that's why they are tempting, I think. So I'm not necessarily saying that all the 5 elements or factors that I will mention, they are all entirely wrong. I think that we have good reasons to go for some part of them or some part of some of them, but we should take them as risks as well. We should see the danger behind them as well. That's my point. So I think there's a tendency to concentrate and centralize decision-making power. Marginalizing regional and local governments, that's a bad thing. I think, so normally, ideally, you would, and again, maybe I'm talking about Spain. I don't know. I tried to have a global view here, but maybe I'm biased. You know, I live in Spain, and maybe some of these mistakes have been committed by the Spanish government in a larger degree. What I see is that many central governments, they tend to marginalize regional and local governments instead of collaborating with them and coordinating with them. And in Spain, for instance, this is dramatic because the healthcare system was decentralized actually at the regional level. So we had 17 different health systems, not only one. But as soon as the crisis started, the management of the crisis was centralized in the central government, and they took over all these 17 health systems without being familiar necessarily with all of them and so on. Second, there's a tendency to marginalize other national powers such as legislatures and courts. Marginalizing legislatures, of course, is very dangerous in democratic terms, and I think that, you know, we should all be aware of the risks of this. And marginalizing courts is also a risk, and what I see is many courts are paralyzed, as I said before. They stopped their activity for security and safety reasons. But the thing is, we cannot afford having courts closed down for a longer time. They need to do their job, and especially they need to do their job in controlling the government and in controlling these restrictions of civil rights, particularly. But even worse, I think, there's also a tendency to disempower even more transnational, international, and global institutions and agencies like the WHO. Surprisingly, paradoxically, right? So and of course, Donald Trump is like, you know, the paradigmatic example of this, but it's not the only one. So there are many prime ministers and presidents in the world who are, from the beginning, they never relied on what the WHO was saying, or just very little. And they have been running their own programs quite, you know, apart from what the international community has been saying. The second temptation that governments might have is actually the temptation of abuse, taking advantage of this concentration of power and abuse the citizens' rights by using it. I think, of course, it makes sense, and I was, you know, I defended in Spain the declaration of the state of emergency, a state of alarm, as we call it here. That's the first stage, because that, I think, that's the way to actually activate the kind of mechanisms that we have in our constitution to try to have some control from the perspective of the legislature. But the thing is, you know, as soon as you declare a state of alarm, of course, you are legitimizing this concentration of power, and perhaps they use this power, you know, too much, right? And maybe they can, and the Prime Minister Jakobsdóttir, again, she referred to that, some governments might actually unduly or excessively restrict individual freedoms and civil and particular political liberties. And these might happen at different levels with the confinement measures, that they might be somehow exaggerated at some point, or that there might be other alternatives that are less aggressive against civil rights. But there's a concern about privacy, as the Prime Minister mentioned as well. There's also a concern about the rights of protest, and we have seen actually some judicial decisions in some countries trying to protect the right of protest, even in times of confinement, because I mean, we cannot afford having governments running out of control of any watchdog, any social or civil watchdog or organization that tries to keep governments under control. And then there's also pressure on political rights and electoral systems. I don't have time to go into the details here. The third temptation is what we might call the sinking boat fallacy. That's just something that, you know, came to my mind last night. I don't know if it's a good name. The sinking boat fallacy. So this is basically the idea of asking for temporary truce, and I've seen this in many governments as well. So what they say is, look, we are in a time of crisis or an emergency situation. So basically, the boat is sinking, and now it's the time to follow captain's orders, right? So forget about political criticism or political opposition. That's not the time for it. We will have some time in the future to catch up and come back and revise what we've been doing. But now it's not the time for having a political argument. I think that is, again, there might be some truth behind this idea. And I can certainly understand the idea that now we should all come together and, try to face the crisis together in unity and so on. But, at the same time, democracy is about having mechanisms of control, having mechanisms of counterbalance and checks and balances, and also having political argument. And I think that we need political opposition more than ever. And I'm talking from Spain here. It's a counterexample because our political opposition is awful, and I think they've been playing awfully. But still, I think in democracy we need this kind of control all the time, and I think it's a risk if we use the argument that we are living a time of emergency to try to reduce it. I think, in the end, what comes reduced, what comes shrinked with this fallacy is accountability itself and the responsiveness of governments. And yes, one argument that I repeat all the time when I discuss with many people, and I'm sure you are going through the same kind of discussions, many people you can hear here and there, you can hear the argument, oh, look, we used to hear this argument more at the beginning of the crisis, not anymore, I would say. But at the beginning, you could hear many people saying, look at the Chinese. They've been fantastic. They've been super organized, super effective. They built up a hospital in 10 days. And something like this could only happen in China. And here, because we have democratic governments, it's totally unexpected and impossible to have this. And, one of my arguments to reject this kind of inclination for some kind of an authoritarian regime was to say, look, but the Chinese people, first of all, they don't know now, and they will probably never know exactly what happened, and partly because the government keeps control over all the mechanisms of information, or almost all of them. But second, there's no possibility of having any accountability here. So even ex post, even afterwards, nobody will be able to hold the government into account. While here in democratic governments, we will. At least that's the idea. And so that was my argument. I insist on this, but at the same time, I think we can, for certain things, we cannot wait for having this kind of ex post revision. For many things, having an ex post revision will be too late. And I think that we should never reduce accountability, even in times of emergency. The fourth temptation, and I'm coming to an end of this second part, the fourth temptation is the paternalistic temptation. And of course, it comes driven by this exaggeration regarding the risk of chaos and riots, and how ignorant the people is, and how fear-driven irrational behavior they might undertake. And this comes usually under the idea of or the motto of the people are not ready for this, right? So I have many friends who are politicians, and they are good-willed and all that. But the thing is, this is a quite common thought that they have. The people, the population, the public is not ready for this. We should never share this information that's too sensitive, or that might generate fear, or we could perhaps lose control over what people are doing. And these bring some governments to be less transparent than usual. And I think that governments in general are very little transparent. I think there's a long way of improvement there. But in times of emergency, I think that this gets even worse. And finally, the fifth temptation is what I call the expertocracy fallacy. And here, this is the only point which I allow myself to disagree a little bit with what the Prime Minister Jakobsdóttir said. I totally understand, and I think, in fact, I mentioned here in the slide, I think this is the best case scenario, to be honest. If we move to United States, so what Prime Minister Jakobsdóttir, she didn't mention anyone, but she referred to some politicians who might, be ignoring what science has to say. And of course, that's terrible. I'm not going to defend those politicians at all. That's not my argument at all. But I think, what I call the expertocracy fallacy starts with underestimating the people's capacity to understand the problem and the risks involved and the responses that are needed. And therefore, for many governments, actually, there might be a temptation to seek refuge in expert-based management, right? So for them, it's, I can imagine many prime ministers saying, we created a commission of experts, basically epidemiologists and doctors, and, we are just doing what they recommend us to do. And again, I think that sounds very sensitive, very sensible. I think, makes sense to defer on experts, especially in situations of emergency. Even if this comes at the cost of excluding some forms of engagement and participation, and I think that this is a loss. But the main problem that I find here is, given how critical and complex the situation is right now, I can understand that some people have the temptation of deferring to experts, but there are many questions that we should be asking there. Who is an expert? I've been reading all these weeks, I've been reading reports written by epidemiologists, which of course you would expect, an epidemiologist is expert number one in telling us how to fight against a virus, a pandemic. But the thing is, they've been writing, or I've been reading reports written by epidemiologists telling us how to organize life in schools or in universities or in mobility, in transportation in cities, or in many other areas in which they are not experts at all. And they are just writing about this without knowing actually the technical problems or the technical details or facts of the matter in all these areas. So the first question is, who is an expert? Of course, epidemiologists are experts, but economists are also needed when we need to balance pros and cons of different alternatives, and as well as lawyers, as well as political scientists, as well as many other kinds of experts that might be relevant. So who is an expert, and on what this person is an expert? As another question, do experts really know all what they need to orient or directly make political decisions? So what I see is that many epidemiologists and many economists, not to mention lawyers and political scientists, they make recommendations and they do their best. They all try to help, or many of them try to help. But the thing is, we don't know enough, and especially regarding the technical and more technical issues, we don't know enough. So it's not so obvious that we are experts actually in addressing the things that are more important now, that are things that remain under uncertainty. And third, and also regarding to this, there's an important point that connects with my last part of the talk, which is that much information that we need, that is relevant to guide our political decisions, is actually distributed. So many people from different corners of our societies, they have access to different pieces of information that might be relevant. And they might not be experts in the literal sense, but the fact is that they have the information that we need to make those decisions. And finally, there's also this fact that quite often experts disagree. And I see it also in this case. Experts disagree, which shows actually that there's no obvious truth that experts know and that the rest of mortals ignore. But secondly, sometimes, and that's the worst part, experts disagree, interestingly, in a way that tracks or is based on some kind of ideologically driven disagreement, previous or underlying ideological disagreement, which makes me question also the idea of to what extent their expert opinion is definitely objective or unbiased, or whether alternatively it might be actually ideological. So just very briefly, I think, as I said, I'm very critical in the way about the way in which our institutions have been managing with this. I think the WHO has failed dramatically, and I'm sorry to make this point because I'm sorry to say anything that might help Donald Trump's argument against the WHO. Is super obvious to me, and I think that is you need to be a dam, actually, not to say it that way, that the only way to face a pandemic in an effective way is by coordinating the global efforts of all countries. So we need more than ever international agencies and institutions like the WHO. But that needs to be compatible with being critical about what the WHO has been doing or what they haven't been doing. And I think that at this point, they haven't been able even to coordinate a single way of collecting and categorizing that data. So we have every country counts infected people or deaf people differently. We cannot compare data. The data is very dirty at this point. And it's amazing that in the society, in the information society in which we live, things like this still happen. They failed in coordinating strategies to face the pandemic. They haven't even met one of their central aims, which is using soft power and soft law to shame and criticize countries who are not doing well, right? And we know that they failed to criticize China at the beginning, and they failed to criticize the Spanish government when it was obvious to everyone that the Spanish government was being too late in addressing the crisis. But I think the same might be said of a variety of other institutions, international institutions, from United Nations to the IMF, but also to the G7, G8, G20. All these are gone. You don't see them reacting to this or having any role in the fight against the pandemic. And the same might be said regarding the European Union. I'm very critical about this. And again, I'm critical about how many national governments are dealing with this. But just let me finish. I think what these 5 temptations show us is, or one of the things, I mean, it's not the only one, of course, but one of the things that we can draw from the analysis of these 5 temptations is that many of them, they come with a risk, the danger of missing something that is essential to democracy, which is the power of collective intelligence. And I think that collective intelligence has the potential of significantly improving both the quality and the efficacy of decision-making, and at the same time, improving the democratic legitimacy of decision-making, which is needed now more than ever. And now, finally, let me end with these couple of examples, right? On the one hand, you have Participedia. You may be familiar with this. So this is like the Wikipedia of political participation. One thing they've been doing is they've been collecting experiences of political participation or citizen engagement in trying to generate solutions or help governments to fight against the pandemic. And there's plenty of interesting examples. And if you know some that are missing in the webpage, it would be great if you can help them to collect them, because I think it's a great place to have this kind of global view of a variety of initiatives, many of them super interesting about how to use collective intelligence to help governments struggling against this. And the final example is a MOOC, a massive online open course that the GovLab in New York has been producing. It's amazing that they came to produce it in just 2 months or less than 2 months. Now they have only an English version of it, but they are working into the Spanish translation, and they will have a Spanish translation by this week, or early next week. And you can find the MOOC in covidcourse.thegovlab.org. And so basically, the GovLab is directed by Beth Novick. And basically what Beth Novick and her collaborators, what they've been doing is they've been asking people who have been personally involved in previous crises, ranging from the management of the Fukushima nuclear plant accident to the Ebola outbreak in Africa, Western Africa in 2014, and to another great variety of different crises, different emergency situations. And they've asked experts on this and experts on collective intelligence, and they've asked them about providing concrete examples about how collective intelligence can help, basically in a variety of ways, collecting data or inviting the people, the public, the crowd, to suggest ideas, to come with creative solutions and propose solutions, or having focus groups and discussing more complex issues, and so on. So you can find in the page that I mentioned, you can find 12 short videos where you can have access to all these experts. And the basic idea, and I finished with this, the basic idea is that relevant information and resources of different kinds, good ideas and creative solutions are, of course, distributed across the society. So they can emerge from, from a right combination of many and plural perspectives. Diversity and plurality here is key. And of course, you need experts involved. I'm not saying, as I said before, I'm not claiming that experts should be ruled out. You need experts involved, but there are different forms of expertise. And also, crucially, ordinary citizens who are, especially those who are directly affected, they can also be very relevant to make decisions. So that was my final example. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jose. Thanks a lot. We have first a comment from Eyja Margrét Brynjarsdóttir, who is professor of philosophy here at the University of Iceland. So, Jose, maybe you unshare the screen. Eyja, are you there?
Yes. Hey. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, thank you very much, Jose, for your talk, and I think you did such a good job of throwing light on how complex this the situation is. There are so many different pieces of concerns and information, areas of expertise, and so on, that are all really important, and it's probably impossible for anybody to have an overview of over all of those pieces, and that seems to me to be such a big challenge to figure out the way how to navigate, and I would like to ask you what you think, because, well, certainly the decision making has to be coordinated by somebody and centralized somewhere, because, well, even the experts usually only know about their field of expertise, and there are so many other pieces that are relevant. So at least there have to be attempts to coordinate, and you talked about how, well, centralizing decision making at a national executive level too much is not good. So would you like to see this kind of coordination more on an international level, and then, well, better executed than you think the WHO has been doing?
Yes, definitely. So I think in situations like this, we need some level of concentration and coordination. That's obvious, I think. But just let me use the example of the European Union, right? So we haven't had any coordination between European member states. Not coordination at all, right? We count infected people and deaf people differently. We don't have coordinated the initiatives that we have enacted to fight against the virus. We have not even, I mean, what I say, I work at the university. My colleagues at the university, those working on epidemiology and virology, they coordinate with their colleagues in other countries much more than our governments have been doing within the European Union. So the thing is, we definitely need some level of centralization. For me, what is begging the question, and I think I would say it's directly rather wrong, it's to presume that the ideal level of centralization is the nation state. First of all, because this is a global pandemic, so it seems evident to me that the kind of coordination that we need is a global one, right? So that's why I think we should have needed more than ever a strong WHO. I think what we are seeing today, and when I blamed or I criticized the WHO, it was not for blaming the people who are running the organization. I think they've done whatever they have been able to do. We are paying the price of having deprived them from resources, economic resources and power in the last years, in the last reforms of the organization. So I think we should need more global coordination, yes. And at the same time, we should see more decentralization or more kind of, allow more flexibility to allow different, for instance, regions. I think that the German model is a good one, I think. If we could upscale the German model to the global scale, I think that would be like my ideal model. So you have some level of national centralization, but then you also have the Länder, who are making decisions. They have, they have their own policies and they make their own decisions about what stages of the confinement or deconfinement they are going through. And I think, that should be also, we should make room for this kind of diversity also in making some decentralized decisions at the same time. But what I see, and that was what I tried to strengthen, is the point that what I see is centralization and concentration of power only at the national level, at the expense of both subnational units and supranational or global units. And I don't see any reason to centralize power only at the national level to face a problem that is clearly global.
Okay, great. The two people want to ask questions, so I'm gonna have them ask the questions first, and then if you could give a brief answer because we are running out of time. So Robert, if you would be first, very brief. We don't hear you, Robert. There's some... Okay, no. Katrin, do you want to come first?
Yes, sure. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Great. I was just going to add a little idea that came to my head when I was listening to your great talk, Jose. It's so nice to see you again. And
nice to see you.
Great talk. When you had the slide up on the different problems, the growing complexity, the globalization, digital revolution, crisis of democracy, and now you've added the COVID. What my had suggested was, why can we not look at the COVID as some sort of a solution to the above questions? So we've seen during the COVID that the growing complexity has actually been slowed down to a certain extent, that the whole world has actually slowed down in its own complex connection. We've also seen the globalization turned downwards or on its head, basically, like you explained, that this is a global problem and it will not be solved in different methods and global solutions. And also we've seen the digital revolution, just look at this conference, for example, and we've not faced completely how we can face the crisis of democracy, but we should actually crowdsource how COVID can provide that solution also. And then we are totally using your emphasis on the crowdsourcing and the situation that we now face all of a sudden to try to tackle the above. So that's just a comment that we want to use.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, it's an excellent comment, and it's great to see you, Katrin. I think, you're right. I think that the COVID might come. I mean, you know me, I'm very optimistic, despite all what I said in my talk, but I'm very optimistic. So I think that the COVID comes, as any other crisis, it comes with a great opportunity, right? I would resist the idea of calling the COVID the solution, because I think it's clearly a problem and people are dying and so on. But it's true that it gives us an opportunity. So many people, even from the strictly health point of view, many people say that it could have been worse, actually, right? So the virus is not as lethal as it might have been. And many epidemiologists were predicting that something like this might come. And there were worse scenarios in terms of the lethality of the virus and so on. And actually what they say is that they don't exclude that at some point in the future, we will face a worse scenario, a worse virus affecting us. So I think one possible interpretation of what is happening is that the COVID-19 is like a big trial, right? It gave us the chance of prove and test whether we were ready to face something like this. I think the big conclusion is that we have failed, right, so far. So we were not ready at the global level. I think that many countries have done exceptionally. But I think at the global level, I think the conclusion, unfortunately, is that we were not ready. But, you know, at some point, because I'm optimist, I think that we will go through it. And I think that it will help us actually to reflect more on how to address the other problems, the other factors of change. So yes, I basically agree with what you say. And I think that it can give us the right kind of motivations to make progress in the other areas. I can see it actually, just to make it very concrete. I can see it myself at the university. I'm vice rector of innovation. We tried to introduce innovative ways of teaching all the time. Most of my colleagues were reluctant and, you know, skeptic about these methods. Now they are forced to do it, and you know what? Many of them are becoming enthusiasts of the new technologies and the way of remote teaching and so on. So yeah, I really think that it's a great opportunity.
Isn't that the universal experience? Everybody has become a... But so the time is out now.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, but Robert, I really want to, because we have a 15 minutes break now, and I really want to stick tight to the schedule. So I'm not going to take more questions right now. We'll see if there's opportunity later on. Let me just say one thing before we take the break. There will be a round table at the end of the day. It's going to be a pretty much improvised. I hope that the speakers, that you, Jose and Albena, that you're going to stay with us. But even if you can't stay the whole day, if you can join us at the round table, and that will also be an opportunity for questions that we have not the opportunity to answer well enough now. But I'm going to do a 15 minutes break now. Lisa Herzog is going to be next, and Albena Asmanova, Bakar Berikashvili, Jose, Marti, and Eyja, Margrét. Thanks a lot for your contribution, for your talks and comments. And let's meet again at 10.